I declare open the third meeting of the first regular session 2019 of the Executive Board of UNDP, UNFPA and UNOPS. So this morning we will continue the UNDP segment with Agenda Item 2, Evaluation of UNDP Support to Poverty Reduction in the Least Developed Countries, Document DP/2019/4, and the accompanying management note, and the report of the Independent Evaluation Office on its support to evaluation capacity development, Document DP/2019/6. I now give the floor to Mr. Indra Naidu, Director, Independent Evaluation Office, first to present the evaluation of UNDP support to poverty reduction in the least developed countries. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, distinguished chairperson for the meeting, distinguished members of the board and colleagues. The Independent Evaluation Office of the UNDP recently carried out an evaluation of UNDP support to poverty reduction in least developed countries. The evaluation forms part of the IEO's medium-term plan approved by the UNDP Executive Board in January 2018. As per the request of the Executive Board, the evaluation is a follow-up to the 2013 IEO evaluation on UNDP's contribution to poverty reduction and responds to subsequent Evaluation Board deliberations and decisions. This evaluation departs from the previous ones by specifically focusing on least developed countries, LDCs. This narrowing of scope allows for a deeper analysis of countries in similar socioeconomic situations where UNDP is a major provider of support. Board members may wish to note that the IEO will soon launch an evaluation of UNDP support to middle-income countries, which will come to the board in 2020. The evaluation under discussion this morning comprehensively covers all 47 LDC country programs in 5 key areas: inclusive growth, employment and social protection, sustainable livelihoods comprising livelihood activities in the extensive portfolio of UNDP support to environment, climate change adaptation and energy, local economic development, economic revitalization in conflict contexts, and mainstreaming the MDGs and SDGs. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, allow me to briefly summarize some of the main conclusions and recommendations emanating from the evaluation. First, the evaluation recognizes that UNDP has allocated a significant proportion of its regular resources to programs in LDCs, and notes that UNDP poverty reduction strategies and areas prioritized by UNDP are highly relevant for the LDCs. Furthermore, UNDP institutional capacity building and policy support has contributed to national development efforts to reduce poverty in the LDCs, and the agency has retained a strong focus on rural poverty reduction and livelihoods. The evaluation notes that UNDP's approach to addressing poverty has been evolving, and new tools were introduced during the strategic plan period 2014 to 2017. UNDP has facilitated private-public cooperation to address poverty issues in LDCs, bringing complementary resources to address policy and institutional bottlenecks. The evaluation suggests that the low scale of such engagement by UNDP has so far limited the potential contributions from the private sector in support of this work. The evaluation also notes that recent efforts to expand partnerships with the private sector to harness market forces for positive social impact offer UNDP a potentially transformative way of working in the future, as was also indicated in a number of statements at the iterative dialogue on poverty eradication held at the board session yesterday. The evaluation points out that LDCs require flexible tools that are fit for purpose and can maximize the impacts of partnerships in less enabling policy environments. It is critical that UNDP develops robust and appropriate tools to enhance private sector engagement in the LDCs. Concrete measures are needed to adopt proven private sector development and impact investment practices to LDC capacities and regulatory environments. In conflict-affected and post-conflict LDCs, UNDP's role and contribution to economic revitalization are especially important. Attention is needed to support bridging the humanitarian and development divide and addressing interlinking dimensions of multiple fragilities and the challenges of income generation capacities. Economic revitalization efforts need a phased approach linked to longer-term efforts to address structural challenges of employment and income generation capacities and investments. To further sustainable livelihood approaches as part of environment, energy and climate change adaptation initiatives, the evaluation points to the importance of consolidating community-level outcomes. Further efforts are needed to forge stronger linkages between UNDP community-level sustainable livelihood programs and rural poverty alleviation policies. Given the severity of employment and income generation challenges for women in the LDCs, UNDP can and should do more to inform gender-sensitive national programs that address the barriers women face in engaging in productive activities and labour markets. UNDP should have well-clarified sectoral strategies for enhancing women's productive capacity and livelihoods to ensure that gender equality is not subsumed within an overly mainstreamed approach. Distinguished delegates, the evaluation highlights that in-house expertise is critical to effective poverty reduction support. It acknowledges the ongoing efforts of UNDP to better harness the organization's country-level expertise and builds up its global network of technical capacities. The evaluation calls on UNDP to define poverty reduction areas where it intends to take out a strong technical support role. More specifically, UNDP should clarify its program focus in the LDCs and outline LDC-specific pro-poor solutions, particularly in Africa. More context-specific and implementable solutions are needed for facilitating planning at the national level and applying integrated solutions to poverty reduction. This recommendation also resonates with the dialogue at yesterday's board session, suggesting UNDP should further clarify what its integrated role entails in the context of LDC poverty reduction support. The evaluation also suggests that UNDP country programs should better distinguish between demand-driven ad hoc services and more comprehensive poverty and livelihood program support. Considering the burgeoning young population across LDCs, the evaluation suggests UNDP should take a more strategic approach to mainstreaming youth employment issues in its poverty reduction support. Finally, given its pioneering indices work, UNDP should demonstrate global leadership in the development and use of multidimensional poverty indices as it strives to reshape the Human Development Reports in response to SDG-related global policy setting opportunities. Composite indices will be increasingly salient to measuring and reporting progress on the SDGs. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, in summary, this evaluation acknowledges the significant, constructive role that UNDP plays in support of poverty reduction in LDCs. As UNDP is devising measures and programs and management change processes in the implementation of the strategic plan for 2018 to 21, I hope this evaluation will inform how the organization can further enhance its contribution to inclusive growth, sustainable livelihoods and employment. UNDP management have asked to continue a dialogue with the IEO on its response to the evaluation, a process we welcome and appreciate. We stand ready to engage and contribute to this dialogue. I'm joined on the podium by Lead Evaluator Vijaya Vadivelu and IEO Deputy Director Arnold Hogg, who will also assist me in responding to questions. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Naidu for his presentation, and I now give the floor to Mr. Abdoulaye Mardié, Assistant Administrator and Director, Bureau for Policy and Program Support, to present the management note. Have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Dear distinguished delegates, dear Indran, as we discussed yesterday, poverty continues to be the greatest global challenge of our time. The World Bank estimates that over 700 million people lived below the international poverty line of $1.90 per day in 2015, with about 800 million people close to this threshold. But when considering multidimensional poverty as computed by UNDP to get out of the tyranny of GDP, the figures are even more staggering. A total of 1.3 billion people are multidimensionally poor, with women, people younger than 18 years of age, and those in urban settings increasingly disproportionately affected. For this reason, eradicating poverty lies at the heart of everything UNDP does. Yesterday, during the interactive dialogue on poverty, you had the opportunity to hear directly from our administrator about UNDP's commitment to do all it can to help countries, including LDCs, to eradicate poverty. UNDP's role in supporting countries to reduce poverty has been recognized since the late 1980s. Previous evaluations have acknowledged UNDP's success in embedding a multidimensional perspective of poverty across national and global debates, creating enabling environments to help governments develop pro-poor policies, and expanding local capacities for policy making. But there is no silver bullet or clear set of policies and related competencies that, if applied, will result in poverty eradication. Poverty is directly dependent on context, on types of problems and priorities. The multidimensionality of poverty requires cross-cutting integrated interventions to support people exiting poverty and preventing people from falling back into poverty. This evaluation is indeed very timely, and UNDP welcomes its findings, conclusions, and recommendations. We see it as an important opportunity to further deepen and strengthen our poverty eradication work and inform UNDP's next generation poverty offer. This is why we have committed to undertake further consultations with the Independent Evaluation Office and member states over the coming month. A comprehensive management response will be presented at the Executive Board annual session in June this year. Meanwhile, the present management note presents an opening set of reflections on the evaluation. UNDP is pleased to note the evaluation's conclusions that UNDP's poverty reduction program approaches and areas are highly relevant for LDCs, and that UNDP remains the agency of choice, both for policy and implementation support. This echoes the finding from the recent synthesis of UNDP independent country program evaluations that, I quote, said, UNDP contribution was perceived as especially noteworthy in the areas of governance and poverty reduction, which are also the areas where the greatest amount of funding is allocated, end of quote. UNDP's focus on multidimensional poverty, in line with the ask of the 2030 Agenda, includes areas of work that are not within the scope of the current evaluation. There is significant contribution, for instance, from our work on governance to adopt legislation and policies to eliminate discrimination and protect the most vulnerable in LDCs. The evaluation does not include UNDP's critical contributions to multidimensional poverty reduction through its health work. Similarly, there is no direct reference to marginal or excluded groups, which is critical to the 2030 Agenda's commitment to leave no one behind. At a minimum, there should be clear recognition of UNDP's work in these areas as contribution to strong intermediate poverty reduction outcomes. These areas have been and continue to be part and parcel of the organization's poverty eradication approach. This being said, the evaluation speaks to areas where we believe we can and should do better. We take careful note of the areas where we need to further strengthen poverty work in LDCs, including continued strengthening of capacities to address the multidimensionality and complexity of poverty eradication interventions, developing more scalable and transformative solutions with better linkages between community-level sustainable livelihoods programs and rural poverty alleviation policies. Strengthen partnership with the private sector to expand productive capacities and eradicate poverty and form more targeted and strategic poverty programming. More systematically addressing the humanitarian development nexus, as we discussed it yesterday. And finally, improving the strategic impact of youth and gender-responsive policies and programs. Let me now offer preliminary reflections on these areas that are detailed in the evaluation recommendations. On recommendation 1, that UNDP have a more consistent program focus and engagement. UNDP will tailor support to the specific development settings in which multidimensional poverty needs to be addressed. We concur with the importance of taking a programmatic approach to eradicate poverty in the LDCs, which is central to the implementation of UNDP's Strategic Plan 2018-2021. However, we disagree. Maybe disagree is a word very strong. I would say we are at variance with the notion that being programmatic is at odds with being demand-driven, noting that all our support to countries comes through our country programs, which are guided by countries' national development plans and the 2030 agenda. And as we all emphatically said yesterday, context does matter. We note the additional opportunity provided by the UN reform process and the integrator function accorded to UNDP by member state in UNGA Resolution 72 to 79, operative paragraph 32. We embrace this role, which cuts across the breadth of UNDP's mandate and the ability of its officers to help connect the dots across multiple dimensions of poverty and sustainable development. UNDP has already begun elaborating its new integrator offer, including through acceleration labs, country support platform, integrated policy support on the SDG, all of which aim to bring together relevant expertise from across the UN system and beyond to address the challenges of multidimensional poverty and sustainable development. On recommendation 2, to define poverty areas where UNDP intends to stake out a strong technical role. This is fully reflected in the implementation of our strategic plan, which has poverty eradication as its guiding vision. The strategic plan articulates signature solutions, 6 of them, that respond to specific development settings to fully address the challenges of multidimensional poverty and intersecting vulnerability. Signature Solution 1, which is the primus inter pares of the 6 signature solutions, focuses on the combination of integrated solutions that are needed to tackle drivers that impact exiting from and falling back into poverty. At the same time, it is linked to all the other signature solutions, ranging from closing the energy gap and nature-based solutions to gender empowerment and addressing vulnerability, resilience, and issues of governance. UNDP's new Global Policy Network, the GPN, will enable UNDP to better leverage expertise across a range of social, environmental, and economic domains, including linkages to fragility and crisis. On recommendation number 3, to demonstrate global leadership in the development and use of multidimensional poverty indices. I am proud of our record in this area and the new partnership and policy capacities now being shaped. UNDP is developing a new generation of human development reports for the 2030 agenda, including regional and national SDRs and a number of policy advocacy products. The upcoming 2019 SDR will be focused on inequality, and you have heard Akim Steiner yesterday dwell on it. UNDP has entered into a series of partnerships with leading institutions on addressing inequality and poverty, including with the World Inequality Lab, to better measure inequality across countries and over time. Similar investments have been made in research and partnerships related to measurement of multidimensional poverty. After having co-developed the MPI with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OFI, we are jointly rolling out a new national multidimensional poverty index methodology. In response to the considerable demand we get from countries in this area, UNDP will roll out a national handbook on MPI in the coming month to improve capacities and communication. On recommendation number 4, to increase the pace and thrust of private sector development and impact investment support to LDCs, UNDP is indeed diversifying its support to SDG financing solutions, including with the private sector. UNDP's new private sector development and partnership strategy, to be launched early this year, will support private sector development and financing for LDCs and fragile contexts. The new SDG Impact Initiative, and Akim Steiner explained it deeply yesterday, aims to help channel private investment and capital for SDG implementation at the country level. At the same time, UNDP is focused on multiple sources of SDGs financing and applies several tools, including what we call the DFAs, the Development Finance Assessments, to help countries arrive at a better understanding of SDG financing. We see the partnership with UNCDF to be especially critical, in addition to our joint work that now covers about 45% of the LDCs. A new collaboration agreement on local development finance and financial inclusion will enable the deployment of in-depth expertise and innovative financing models in over 30 LDCs. On recommendation 5, UNDP agrees on the need to strengthen linkages between community-level sustainable livelihoods programs and poverty eradication policies. UNDP will leverage the opportunities offered by a common SDG focus to continue to build better linkages with longer-term development initiatives relating to sustainable and inclusive local economies, risk-informed development, and integrated ecosystem-based approach to inform a new generation of poverty and environment-related initiatives. On recommendation number 6, bridging the humanitarian development divide is a critical priority for UNDP work on poverty elaborations. We have started to do it within UNDP by practicing the nexus in the new GPN by combining the two entities, the Policy Bureau and then the Crisis Bureau. On recommendation number 7, for strengthened partnership, we welcome this recommendation, which is central to our approach to better address poverty and inequalities. We are systematically improving our partnership with IFIs, following the launch of the UN World Bank Strategic Partnership Framework for the 2030 Agenda in May 2018. We are now advancing a more systematic country-level UNDP World Bank collaboration to accelerate SDG progress. Similarly, I am pleased to inform that we'll be working with the Islamic Development Bank on the global program on economic empowerment and value change in Africa in 2019. UNDP has also launched joint action plans with the China Development Bank, the Latin America Development Bank, CAF, and Central European Bank. Our recommendation number 8, addressing gender inequality, is at the heart of our poverty focus, reflected in the interlinked signature solution and the UNDP gender equality strategy. I'm sure we'll come back deeper into that very critical area during our discussion, echoing what we have discussed yesterday. On recommendation number 9, we are committed to enhance youth employment and empowering programming. UNDP is working to mainstream youth employment issues in the implementation of strategic plan and the signature solutions, as well as through partnership with youth organizations, civil society, private sector, government, and UN agencies. I am pleased that at last Friday informal sessions, UNDP had a very engaging and constructive discussions with your delegations and with the Evaluation Office on the finding and recommendation of this evaluation. This EB session is the start of an open dialogue on the implications of the evaluation for UNDP's work on poverty. I welcome the opportunity to be here with you and expanding this discussion and to listen to your views and recommendations. I'm joined on the podium by Ahuna, our Director for Africa, and Rosemary, who is our lead pioneer and expert on poverty reduction. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Mr. Mardie for his presentation, and now I open the floor for any comments or questions you may have. Please press the button if you wish to speak. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Botswana. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, thank you very much for this opportunity and for the important feedback on this very important matter, the evaluation on the poverty issue. So I believe yesterday's discussion, the interactive dialogue with the administrator, did underscore the importance that all of us here attach to this as a very important issue and the interest that the debate yesterday generated. And it's very timely to receive immediately after that discussion the evaluation that this time is focusing on a category of countries that is one of the most challenged categories of countries, 47 LDCs, 31 of them in Africa, as it has been indicated. We appreciate the presentation by Mr. Naidu and the supplementation by Mr. Abdoulaye Ma. And we wanted to also appreciate the information that as follow-up to this new way of evaluations, there will be another forthcoming one in 2020, focusing on another category of countries, of which my country is one of them, the middle-income economies. I think yesterday again, we got reminded that 73% of the poor is concentrated in that very category. So we therefore have good reasons to look forward to that evaluation. And hopefully it will shed similar light that this particular one has shed. I'm also glad to hear that the debate about the involvement of the private sector has been brought to the fore also through this evaluation, that it has indeed confirmed that there is opportunity to bring into this sector the private sector. Let me say that we had raised a question during the discussions on the Board of Auditors, which we sought to just understand the classification of these evaluations. We learned in that context that there is centralized evaluations. We wanted to know the interplay between that and the self-evaluations and external evaluations. So we were told that perhaps we could pursue this very question in this discussion. So we would appreciate getting a word on the difference between those three categories and how they interplay. So I've heard the responses from management on how they perceive these recommendations. So one particular one is the one which Mr. Abdullah Mar has referred to, which I think he became very diplomatic by varying and not disagreeing. I think as diplomats we think that is the best way to say it. But we hear you, program-driven versus demand-driven. I think the point you are making is very important. It's well known that the programs that are being implemented through UNDP or any other entities are informed by the national priorities and are driven by the national development plans and guidelines by those who are receiving the services. So it's most likely that demand will be generated depending on the content of what those countries are looking for. So in that context, we sympathize with your take of that recommendation. So we thought we should make that point. But overall, as I said, we support evaluations. It's an important tool in informing the programming for the future. And we encourage that, you continue this line. In fact, yesterday in the interactive dialogue, our statement was going to be uploaded in the Paper Smart platform. We had, not knowing that you will be bringing the evaluation on middle-income economies, we had a question actually, how you go about differentiating your services to the different categories depending on their status of development. We were looking at the category of LDCs, which is the subject of this evaluation. We were looking at the category of the developing countries in general. And I hope down the line there's also categories of economies in transition. And there's this forthcoming one on middle-income economies. So now I think that question which we had in our statement has been answered. We believe that you do the differentiation based on the information you receive from such evaluations. So I thought I should make that point. In conclusion, we do want to emphasize that I think attention should continue to be paid to the categories of countries depending on their development status. And LDCs are the most challenged, as I said, and I've noted from the evaluation report that there seem to be sufficient resources dedicated to this group of countries, and that should continue. We were way back one of those countries. The same way we know the difficulties of being there, the same way we understand what it takes to get out of there. It takes the support from the UN entities and other partners, and of course in partnership with the governments concerned. So I thought I should underscore these points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I will now read the list of speakers that I have so far so that you have an idea when is your turn, and if you're not on the list, please press the button. I have Bhutan, United Kingdom, Malawi, Sweden, Belgium, Mexico, and Russian Federation. Yes. Now I give the floor to Bhutan. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Delighted to see you presiding over the meeting this morning. Since this is the first time we take the floor, allow me to thank the board for the excellent sessions we had yesterday and express the appreciation of my delegation for the valuable opportunity provided to engage with UNDP leadership in that interactive format. We also thank the speakers this morning for their remarks. We read with great interest the report of the IEO and thank them for the report. This past year, amidst the many complex challenges and trends that emerged at the global level, there were also some encouraging developments. I refer here to the fact that in the past year, of 47 LDCs, 12 were found to have met the threshold for graduation. And of these 12, the GA adopted a resolution formalizing the timeframe for graduation for 3 LDCs this past December. This is truly remarkable as it demonstrates significant levels of achievement across development sectors by graduating states. Equally important, it demonstrates that we as a global community are doing something right in the area of global partnerships and development cooperation to tackle multidimensional poverty, in supporting the national efforts of these states. And in that regard, as one of the graduating states, Bhutan would like to recognize the role of UNDP in supporting national efforts, our national efforts, through its programmatic approach that has bolstered our own national efforts to promote inclusive growth, sustainable development, and resilience, bringing us closer to the realization of self-reliance. At the same time, we must recognize that exit from the LDC category is not a panacea. While a significant success, graduating countries, including Bhutan, continue to face significant challenges and vulnerabilities. While we recognize that elaboration of transition strategies and implementation must be state-led, I would be grateful to hear a little bit more about what role the next generation of UNDP envisions in complementing national efforts for smooth transition in order to ensure that there will not be any backsliding on hard-earned development gains. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the IEO for such a complex and interesting evaluation. I just wanted to pick up a bit more on the recommendations and conclusions on conflict-affected states. I think it was really useful to hear from Mark Lowcock and the administrator yesterday the barriers facing the system on addressing these issues because they are very complex. And while Mark spoke a lot about medium-term solutions and also difficulties on competition between agencies, I think this recommendation on intersecting vulnerabilities is also a huge, clear barrier to being able to tackle these challenges. So I wanted to specifically ask either UNDP or IEO really to comment on what they are doing to pay more attention, as they say in the management note, to these issues, specifically on the amazing work you're doing on governance, which you mentioned, and how that relates to the critical importance of data and strengthening capacities. So those two specific areas of work. And thank you very much, and we very much look forward to the full management response in June. Thanks.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Malawi. And afterwards, I will hand it over to the Secretariat for some responses and comments on what has been said so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the two speakers for the very insightful presentation on the UNDP's work, specifically on their evaluation on LDCs. I think as we're all aware, ECOSOC Resolution 2018-26 had called on the UNDS to prioritize allocations to LDCs through clear operational guidelines and budget targets towards LDCs. In this regard, I'd like to commend the UNDP for being one of the UN agencies that has taken the step forward and implemented this particular call. However, as based on yesterday's discussion, it was quite clear that while poverty is a universal problem, it doesn't have a universal solution. Each different country, each different region goes through poverty and experiences poverty hurdles contextually, and therefore the UNDP's approach to problem-driven is a good first step, but we hope that we go further with it in order to ensure that LDCs and other developing countries benefit from the UNDS and other relevant programs. In this regard, I'd like to specifically go to climate change and commend the UNDP for the GPN and other such initiatives. As we're all aware, among the many graduating LDCs and for LDCs as a whole, climate change is one of the big issues that is impacting them and affecting the vulnerability economically and socially for the member states. So I wanted to know how far have we gone apart from policy and in terms of implementation within the UNDP and for the UNDP leadership in prioritizing climate change and in turn balancing climate change and the impact it has on economic issues in LDCs and other developing countries. And last but not least, I would also like to commend the UNDP for recognizing the need for vertical coordination, specifically between the system, specifically as it goes through reform at the moment, and the different parties, private sector, grassroots, and other parties. But also to reiterate that the LDCs as a whole are committed to horizontal coordination within the states. And we look forward to working further with the UNDP and other UN agencies, and also are committed to development and sustainable development as a whole. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malawi, and now I give the floor to Mr. Mardia to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to note with appreciation the positive perspective that are coming from the floor, and quite encouraging and guiding us on the way forward on Botswana. I do also agree that deep diving on a work on the middle-income countries will be extremely important, as you rightly said, and we said it yesterday. More than 2/3, in fact 73% of people living under the poverty line are in the middle-income countries. In fact, I would like to refer us all to a work that UNDP is doing at the request of Botswana, of Mauritius, one of the highest middle-income countries in Africa, where UNDP has been supporting Mauritius to design and implement a Marshall Plan on poverty eradication. It's been quite seminal work that we intend to replicate or to inspire work we are doing in other middle-income countries. Being middle-income doesn't free us from the grooves of poverty. Just to build on what Bhutan said, and thank you, Bhutan, for recognizing the work that UNDP is doing, sliding back is very easy. We all know that middle-income countries faces two syndromes if we don't help them, what we call the middle-income trap and what we call the middle-income blues. The middle-income trap is when you get out of the LDC zone and you don't have enough structurally transformed economy or diversified economy so that you can have engines to keep continuing get off the trap. And UNDP, for one of our development settings, the second one, which is structural transformations, will support countries get out of it, ensuring that the economies are diversified, ensuring that when you take value chains, remember, let's recall that most of the LDCs, especially in Africa, the growth has been driven by a few selected commodities. You don't have enough value retention in the value chain to ensure that there's deepening of the economy. Supporting value chain retention is extremely important, and economic diversification. So that support we provide. That's the ensure that countries can keep cruising in the development ladder and not be trapped by the middle-income trap. The middle-income blues is when you expand your economy and then you don't expand your political space through governance. And we discussed it yesterday. Governance is extremely critical to ensure that your economic path keep growing. It's important to deepen governance, basically political inclusion, social inclusion, and so on and so forth, to ensure first that development is inclusive, that all elements of society participate in development. That's the way to get out of what we call the middle-income blues. And we will support countries graduating or even in middle-income status to do so. I'm glad, Mr. Ambassador of Botswana, that you also agree with us that context matters and our response has to be demand-driven. We in UNDP are Keynesian in spirit. We respond to demand. I think it is extremely important. When we say that policy has to be owned by government, that's ownership, we have to align ourselves behind that ownership. Of course, we have templates that you have agreed through the strategic plan that we will use to support your ownership. On Malawi, the question, thank you for recognizing the work we are doing with the GPN. On the climate change, you have heard Akim Steiner yesterday said that it is one of our heightened priority in 2019, along with inequality and migration. In fact, we have been asked by the Secretary General to work on ensuring that the NDCs, the National Determined Contribution, which are the plans that countries have to move forward the climate change agenda, be enhanced so that collectively we can meet in aggregate the 1.5 degree. Today, when you aggregate all the NDCs, the target would be around or above 3%. We will not collectively, as the humanity, deal with the scourges of climate change. So ensuring that we enhance the ambitions of the NDCs is one of UNDP support. Today, UNDP is supporting 30 NDCs implementation. Our ambition is to double it to 60. Coming back to UK's questions, that is secretarial to what we discussed yesterday on the nexuses. Well, this is one of the most difficult exercise. The way we are trying to advancing in the UN system is to have, it boils down to investing in resilience. And we have been tasked by the SG and the DSG to come up with a common resilience UN strategy. And we believe that that platform can be a rallying ground so that humanitarian as well as development agencies work hand in hand to invest in resilience. So, Madam Chair, this is what inspired me to so far.
Thank you very much for your comments. And now I give the floor to Mr. Naidu, Director of Independent Evaluation Office.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were comments, but I'll go to the direct question from the distinguished delegate of Botswana. You queried the two types of evaluation, the independent and the decentralized, or self-evaluation as we call it. These feed off each other. When we do our independent evaluations, we draw heavily on the work that happens at a country level, the decentralized, as well as other work. But the independent is fully independent and reports directly to and accountable to the board. When it comes to the decentralized evaluation, whilst it has important elements of independence, a key consideration is learning. But most of the evaluations in UNDP are at the decentralized level. If you go into the IEO website, you'll find 4,000 decentralized evaluations in the repository across the globe in all the languages. It's useful, this question has come up now. Late yesterday, we launched the new evaluation guidelines, which were jointly launched by Administrator Steiner and myself after 10 years, which clearly explains the different types of evaluation, provides examples, etc., and I think that will be quite useful. In terms of the role of IEO and the decentralized, in the annual report on evaluation, we quality assess the decentralized, and we present those findings to you, so that will come to you in June. But we're happy to present more in terms of the informal. Thank you to the comments from Bhutan. We learned a lot from the Independent Country Program evaluation we completed in 2017. The Human Happiness Index was a point that we brought up. In terms of the UK, we have specific evaluations coming to you in June 2020, disaster and risk management, and Syria and the 3RP will be coming your way. And in the question of Malawi, just to point out, this board approved a portfolio of evaluations as part of the 4-year work plan. We have several evaluations relating to environment and climate change, and I think that will be quite useful for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll continue with the speakers list. I now give the floor to Sweden.
Thank you. I'm pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and on my own country, Sweden. We wish to thank the Independent Evaluation Office for the report and UNDP for the management note. On the whole, we believe that the picture which is given in the report is consistent with our experience from extensive cooperation with UNDP in several LDCs. We can support the recommendations of the report and look forward to UNDP's proposals on concrete action. We also look forward to have an exchange with UNDP and the board members in June on the evaluation. Thus, a board decision on the management response would be appropriate in June. We would have preferred if the conclusions and recommendations of this evaluation were discussed at the same time as the UNDP's full management response was delivered. This would have enabled the board members to relate to UNDP's final responses and proposed measures. We share the evaluation's assessment that UNDP should focus on LDCs with recurrent and protracted crisis, and that this indicates that UNDP must focus in particular on Africa. In this regard, we wish to learn what UNDP can do to contribute to the development of LDC-specific pro-poor solutions in Africa, which is a concept mentioned in the report. In several LDCs with recurring and protracted crisis, UNDP plays an absolutely central and irreplaceable role in helping countries in shaky political situations and with weak administrations. It is key that UNDP's overall actions strengthens countries' capacity to break negative patterns on the long term. UNDP's thought leadership in the development and application of multidimensional poverty analysis needs to be invested in. We believe that the Human Development Report Office future as a hub for UNDP's global policy work in the field and as knowledge and methodological center to help countries and regions to develop their own data analysis and policies has great potential. We thus wish to know more about the UNDP leadership plans for the office. UNDP's role in supporting democratic and good governance is central to the process of poverty eradication. And here we also want to highlight the importance of working against corruption and for the inclusive democratic processes and the rule of law. UNDP is a trusted partner for countries to manage difficult choices, both political and technical, and to develop laws and institutions that promote inclusive, just, and peaceful societies. We take note of the recommendation that UNDP should take a more comprehensive approach to tying up and complement their various efforts for the environment and climate in order to support countries to develop viable policy and management of the environment and climate. We would also like to express our strong support for Recommendation 8, which suggests specific resources for gender equality and women's economic empowerment in the LDCs. It is our expectation that UNDP has a very high ambition and capacity to prioritize actions that are good for women and girls in the LDCs and their prosperity, economic empowerment, opportunity, and participation. In addition, we lend our full support to special efforts for and with young people. UNDP's added value must be more than the sum of all projects. It is important that each country office takes its starting point in how UNDP's overall involvement affects the prospects for poverty reduction, reducing inequalities, and fosters social cohesion through a pro-poor lens, and that UNDP has the capacity to analyze, strategize, and monitor beyond the single projects. We look to UNDP in its role as integrator, as well as expert on poverty and development, to support UNCT with expertise, analysis, and joint programming and monitoring. Facilitating common baselines and indicators and aggregating data are some of the examples of its important work. UNDP should also protect and quality-proof its work as managing agent for pool funding arrangements, with the aim to ensure that pool funding contributes to effective, responsible, and qualitative work against poverty. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sweden, and now I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few remarks from Belgium. I hope they will be taken into account for improvement of the report and mainly also for the management response that we will receive for the next board meeting. While we highly appreciate the thoroughness of the Evaluations Office report, we have two minor preliminary remarks on methodology and terminology. First, the report consistently refers to the notion of LDC graduation to middle income status, which, according to us, conceptually is incorrect, because many LDCs are already middle-income countries before graduating. LDC is a UN category, while middle-income country is a World Bank category. So we should think in the report you should refer to the graduation of LDC, full stop. Secondly, the report cites a few important facts and figures up front in paragraph 8 such as the percentage of reduction in LDCs compared to the total level of engaged in LDCs and the resources committed to LDCs in percentage. However, we do not learn what the percentage of funds committed to LDCs is within the $5 billion USD volume of overall core and non-core resources that UNDP can engage. We would like to see that figure also. The tone of the report is overall quite critical, which we can expect from an independent evaluation office. A rare but important compliment addressed by the office to UNDP is that the program is succeeding rather well in reaching those farthest behind first. This is a non-negligible asset in terms of SDG implementation in LDCs. Other than that, the predominant image emerging from the report, and in particular from its conclusion number 6, is one of an organization which in most cases develops the right analysis and indicators, but is having trouble to apply those on the ground and with partner countries' governments. An organization which could engage in manifold ways in interlinkages thanks to the diversity of its work, but does not always manage to put this into practice, the interlinkages. Also, an organization that from time to time has to make a few choices, sometimes against things it does, but sometimes even in favor of things it does not yet do sufficiently, such as taking up trade-related issues. Another great asset of UNDP, its unique capability to work at the subnational and local levels, seems to come with a caveat that these interventions often lack long-term strategic thinking. Gender and youth employment-related work in LDCs are also facing hurdles and approaches deficiencies according to the report. In sum, LDCs are not always the easiest places to work in, but UNDP needs to use all available levers in order to make the Agenda 2030 work for these countries and their populations if we want Agenda 2030 to succeed at all. Belgium realizes the juncture UNDP has reached and considers the UNDS reform implementation as a chance for UNDP to reposition itself in the development system landscape. We concur with the Evaluation Office in that this repositioning could and should include more attention for development of and partnering with the private sector. More attention too for assistance to transition, including cross-sectoral social protection or for multiple fragilities, inter alia in post-conflict countries, which make up quite a sizable portion within the LDC group. For the sake of its enduring legitimacy, UNDP can simply not afford to have SDG integration get stuck at the technocratical level, as paragraph 47 of the report holds. While welcoming the suggestion by the Office for UNDP to de-silicize its interventions under the Global Environmental Facility and the Green Climate Fund, we would also like to hear from UNDP how realistic it is to expect it to establish such interlinkages in its capacity as an implementing partner of both funds. It would be interesting to hear whether and how the program sees its integrator and SDG accelerator tasks extend into those work strands and roles as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think the distinguished representative of Belgium, a good point, by the way, on the terminology. I always thought it was a bit strange to mix two such different criteria. Now I give the floor to Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start by thanking the head of the BPP UNDP's director, and thank you for the excellent document presented. Obviously, Mexico supports the recommendations in the report and the role that the UNDP can play in assisting progress in the fight against poverty in the countries in question, especially if we want to achieve the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. As you indicated, Madam Chairperson, as indicated by the representative of Belgium, my delegation agrees that the measurement of poverty cannot be reduced to exclusively to per capita income. We know, obviously, that in the framework of the United Nations to achieve the goals of the 2030 Agenda and to be in line with its spirit, we have to have a multidimensional approach to the issue of poverty. Since this multidimensional measurement of poverty is a tool that helps us to design better targeted public policies to tackle the specific challenges of each country and each community at the local level. And of course, the delegation of Mexico, given that Mexico is one of the pioneer countries in implementing this methodology of multidimensional measurement of poverty, has a National Council of Evaluation which has a specific mandate to implement this kind of method of evaluation and measurement to measure and combat poverty. And so, bearing this in mind, from my delegation, the approach in the report is a very valid one, and I think that in the future, in addition to working with the Oxford office that has this very important methodology, I think this topic could also be a subject of South-South cooperation, since there are very many successful examples in many different countries, and Mexico has shared this methodology with many countries that have requested it. And this is something that could be considered at the next UN conference on South-South cooperation that will take place in Buenos Aires in a couple of months. And lastly, Madam Chair, I would like to just highlight that for my delegation, the topic of building partnerships at the local level is very important. The coordination between the UN agencies present on the ground, obviously including the UNDP, is very important. They have to obviously play a strategic role, but they also have to coordinate with other agencies present on the ground. And for us, coordination and cooperation with UN agencies is very important. Also very important is building partnerships with local actors. The private sector, as was mentioned, but also civil society and bilateral donors, or those stakeholders in South-South cooperation are also very interested in taking part in this process. And also, we should consider mechanisms that are outside the UN system that could be very useful. And lastly, without, of course, distracting attention from our main topic, which is support for the least developed countries, my delegation is interested in finding out what are prospects for carrying out this evaluation of other categories, which was mentioned. I think Ambassador Lapille mentioned this, and the director for BPPS also mentioned perhaps this in terms of focusing on medium-income countries. So we'd like to find out what are the plans, what are prospects for the future, and obviously we are happy to provide not only political support but practical support. And Mexico is ready to share the methodologies that we have developed and have been working with. Obviously ready to share them with the UN and various special agencies to fine-tune this methodology and adapt it to national context. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Mexico, and now I give the floor to Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We welcome the evaluation report on the role of the UNDP in combating poverty in the poor LDCs, prepared in accordance with the midterm evaluation program for the IEO for 2018-2022. We support the theme running through the report on the importance for the UNDP to develop a comprehensive strategy so as to eradicate poverty based on the root causes and taking into account the local realities. These strategies should be developed in close cooperation with the governments themselves in accordance with the government and should be in line with long-term development plans for social and economic development. The report lays out that UNDP also already has many established successes in this area so as to develop policies in combating poverty. We would like some clear examples of this cooperation to be described. Madam President, it's important that the approach of the UNDP would take into account the multilateral challenges facing LDCs. Most often, these challenges include combating natural disasters, issues linked to climate change, and unemployment amongst the youth, trade barriers for small enterprises as well are an issue. We are convinced that these approaches will be those used by projects financed by the Russian Federation through the UNDP. Madam President, the report repose the actions of UNDP in 26 missions to work to eradicate poverty and to ensure the achievement of the SDGs. We would be grateful if we could have more in-depth information on the expenditures by these missions and their results. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, and now I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the IEO and Assistant Administrator for their presentations from the podium. Much what I would like to say has been covered by previous speakers. I will just limit my intervention to one comment and one question. The comment is this, that we witnessed a very good exchange from the podium between the IEO and the Assistant Administrator in terms of the presentation of the report and main findings and recommendations and the interim management response. And we're looking forward to further engaging with both IEO and the Bureau to discuss the issue in June. And I wanted to add, this exchange is what we envision to be a very useful, informative, and learning process. I think we encourage UNDP to engage in when it comes to dealing with evaluations. So we are very heartened by this exchange. My question is this, that we noticed that UNDP has been working in some innovative and perhaps new areas to the organization. In that the organization is doing some innovation, particularly in the area of impact investment, youth employment, and private partnerships. Areas where other UN agencies also work in and arguably perhaps have a comparative advantage, as to UNDP, recognizing that UNDP works in within a wide mandate. So my question is this: how do you, both IEO and the Bureau, see that UNDP could perhaps work a little bit more with those sister agencies to achieve scale and perhaps a greater impact in those programmatic areas? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I now give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the very interesting presentation and discussion today from the panelists. Actually, my question is very similar to the US, but in particular, I'd be interested to know from IEO and also from UNDP considerations around UNCDF. So I understand that's some sort of internal capacity within UNDP to leverage innovative private sector approaches. So any thoughts on how to take forward some of the lessons learned from that organisation to address the recommendations from this evaluation? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia, and now I give the floor to Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to also thank the panelists for their insightful presentations, and we welcome the report and the recommendations as well as the conclusions, especially the conclusion about graduation support and the recommendations on private sector and the importance of UNDP playing a leadership role in development are very much welcome. I think our point on private sector was made yesterday, so I won't delve into that, but I have a question about the integrator role UNDP will play in the new era. This is not only related to the UNDS reform and the new role that UNDP is expected, but also the LDCs will have a new program in 2021, which will be the first 10-year program that will be designed in the SDG era. And UNDP has, I think, a lot of inputs and comparative advantages that they can bring on. So my question is about, bearing in mind the multidimensional poverty reduction role that UNDP plays, and bearing in mind the new role that we expect UNDP to play as an integrator in the system, how do you see UNDP's role in the run-up to 2021 meeting on LDC 5, and what kind of discussions we can have in the 2 years that will lead us to this conference? How will you conceptualize this integrator role in this specific context? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey, and now I give the floor to Antigua and Barbuda. I have the floor, Ambassador.
I thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to join in others in offering my congratulations to you for your leadership, and to thank the speakers for their presentations. I just have a few points, Madam Chair. And my first point, which is one that I will build on that was raised earlier, I too am wondering whether it will not serve the body better to have the management response and the report at the same meeting, so that, bearing in mind the new approach we tried yesterday, it gives us something to work with so that we understand where the management is coming from in response to the evaluation report. And I would recommend that we give that further thought towards a new approach within the meetings ahead. So, if I hear a report in February and then I get a response in June, it's a little long. I'm also, Madam Chair, looking at the question in the report of graduation. And I agree with my Belgium colleague that if graduation is mentioned, because for SIDS and for my country, graduation isn't a moment of applause, not necessarily, not this graduation. Because for many of us, it puts us in a very difficult position, as we have explained in other occasions. And I'm wondering if the report, when it speaks of graduation, would not give a definition and address the question of multidimensionality of poverty, because the graduation process does not necessarily address that. My third point relates to something I said in the informals. We are not going to achieve the SDGs until we address the question in poverty of persons with disability and the elderly. I've sat here, not heard anything about it, and I said that in the evaluation, in the informals. However, Mr. Allen from the evaluation team handed me the Braille summary of 2 years ago or so. So I want to thank him for that. I haven't read it yet, but I thank you. But I think it's important, though, that we understand as we do evaluations and as we do look at the question of poverty in particular, that we link the lives of persons with disability, and we link the lives of the elderly, because until we find answers to those, we won't answer the question of beating back poverty, poverty within these societies. Finally, again, Madam Chair, I want to thank the presenters and thank for the evaluation report. I want to reiterate that I think it will help us to have both the management report and the report in the same meeting so that we can properly hear both and then respond at the same time with the background information from both sides of the table. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your intervention. And now I give the floor to the last speaker on my list, Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you for the presentations of this evaluation. Switzerland's comments are in line a little bit with what the US, Australia, and also Turkey has said. And I would like to, so it's about the collaboration amongst the funds and programs and other UN agencies, including UNCDF. And I would just like to refer to the common chapter that we all have adopted. And the first area of collaborative advantage is the area of poverty reduction. So all the things that we have said now in terms of sharpening UNDP's integrator role and UNDP's comparative advantage in poverty reduction, we would like to see this reflected also in the evaluation that we will be receiving on the common chapter sometime from now on. And we see it as a good platform and a good example where these questions we just asked can be elaborated. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. Now I turn to the Secretariat for their comments, and first to the UNDP Assistant Administrator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, these are great perspective. Let me have a bird's eye views in my response, and we can drill down further with the Africa Director. Most of our LDCs are in Africa, and then Rosemary, who is our trip captain in poverty reduction. But let me first take the issue of why didn't we didn't have the full management response now. We think, and yesterday was a good perspective on that in the spirit of co-construction, it is good that we have a kind of interactive dialogue where we triangulate not only our discussion between us, management, and the evaluation office, and you, the board. And yesterday did epitomize the spirit of co-creation. And that's what Akim Steiner wanted to drive. This next UNDP is to be created not only by management, by evaluation, and by you, the board. I do recall vividly when I was asked by Akim Steiner to help design the global policy network, this next generation of UNDP policy making. The first person I reached out was Indran Naidu, and I told Indran, since you have been evaluating UNDP for a while now, tell me where are our strengths and our blind spots. And those were used as the foundations of the global policy network. And it was quite strong feedback from Indran and team that is shaping the global policy network. And I think if we expand this interaction with you, as we did yesterday, to triangulate, we'll have a stronger co-creation of the new or the next UNDP. So that would be my strong recommendation, is that we continue in that spirit. We'll have a discussion for the mix as we're having a discussion for the LDCs. I would project that we'll get a stronger UNDP collectively. But I will let Indran and drill down a little bit further. On the MP, to build on Mexico, and thank you, Mexico has been a great driver on the MPIs. And I think that we haven't, as UNDP, reached the scope we have on the Human Development Report. Remember, when we started in 1990s, it was, again, as I said, to defeat this monopoly or tyranny of the GDP. We did defeat that. And we managed to trickle down the concept of Human Development Report all over. All countries now that we are supporting have Human Development Reports. We are not yet there with the MPIs. We have started it in 2010 with OFI, Oxford. Today, I guess, although the index covers 120 plus countries, we have only 26 national MPIs, and Mexico is a leader on this one. And we have even a network of countries working with MPI. I would take your offer to have countries like Mexico lead us or lead the network all the way to BAPA 40, to have in Argentina. I think it's the way forward. If you don't communicate the concept of multidimensionality in dealing with poverty, we haven't had the dent. And I think this is the way to go forward. Coming for Belgium, but my team will give you the granularity of figures, and some countries said it. UNDP is one of the agencies that have a percentage of our resources locked for the LDCs. It's mandatory. I will give you the details, but it's a kind of cult or religion for us that the majority of our resources has to go to the LDCs. But Africa Bureau and then Rosemary can give you the more detail. But I agree, and second, the concept of de-siloizing, getting out of the silo. If I were to evaluate UNDP, I would say that is the syndrome that killed us in the past. That's why the new global policy network is to deregulate this siloing. We used to have people in governance working on governance, people on poverty, people on gender. This is, for me, era of the past. If you look at our signature solution, and we can share it with them, we are organizing them in a matrix format. You take any one signature solution, you will see that it impacts on the other 5, and the other 5 are impacting them. It's a change of culture we are infusing in our people. So if I am a gender expert, I shouldn't be devoting all my energy only on the gender vector. I have to understand how gender is impacted by the other 5 and how gender is impacting the other 5. So we have a template that we can share. We show this kind of matrix way of implementing the SDGs, the strategic plan. And we are seeing already impact in doing this kind of multidimensionality in implementing our strategic plan. Now, and you're right, by saying that UNDP is not alone in this game of poverty reduction. Neither nor UNDP is alone in the game of SDG implementation. We work as a UN agencies. And we do have some templates, some guidance to work together. We talked about the common chapter between UNDP, UN Women, UNFPA, and UNICEF. We are moving extremely fast and deep in implementing the common chapter. We'll be reporting to you. We're evaluating it. But I think that's a first space where we organize our work together. There is a second space where we organize our work together is what is called the strategic results groups. We coalesce in some areas like on implementation, led by UNDP and DESA, on financing, on data, and so on and so forth. So under the leadership of the DSG, agencies are organizing themselves into strategic results groups to ensure that we work together. The third element that is pulling us together is the SDG funding, where we are encouraging UN country team to come up with joint programs and submit it to the principals. It's led by the DSGs to ensure that the program supported by agencies are in sync before we give them resources from the SDG joint fund. So these are elements that we have together to, in a way, force the system to work together, because it's not natural. You have to sometimes put a push on it to force agencies to work together. Now, let me come back on the integrated role of UNDP as was mandated by resolution of the GA 72279, operative paragraph 32, which asked, and especially USG was very strong on that, UNDP to be an integrator. Integrator doesn't mean coordination. Coordination has been delinked to be led by the resident coordinator. But UNDP, as the lead development agent, has to offer a template of integration. It has 4 dimensions. Dimension number 1 is on the analytics. How do we model, for instance, how do we build on the maps that we have been implementing, mainstreaming, accelerated policy support programs that we have been implementing, but going deeper, how do we have models that show the integration of the SDGs? And we have built a lot of models. Some are partial model or even the general equilibrium models that bring together the synergy of all 17 SDGs. And we offer that to countries. So that's the first substantive dimension of integration that UNDP does. The second dimension is on the matrix. Remember, we had the Human Development Index, but it doesn't capture all the dimensions of the SDGs. That's why we have the MPIs. And we are working with UNEP to see how we can bring the missing third dimension of the SDG, which is environment, in our matrix. For the time being, we are only capturing the social aspect of SDGs and now the economic aspect of SDGs. We haven't had a proper index that captures environment. And this is part of the next generation of UNDP. The third element of substantive integration is on financing. UNDP has the leader in pushing forward what we call the DFAs, the Development Finance Assessment. And now we are bringing all agencies to be part of the DFAs, which is guiding the support we provide to countries. By the way, DFAs is not only external financing, it does capture internal financing, domestic resource mobilization, and at the core of it, the fiscal space. Yesterday, I talked about the tax inspector without borders that we are doing with OECD to support countries expand their fiscal base. The fourth substantive dimension of integration is integrated planning, using precisely the integration nature of our 6 signature solutions. Now, the landing of this offer is the country platforms, and then yesterday, as Akim Steiner discussed with you, the accelerator labs. That, to respond to Turkey, is an offer that we can use in preparing the next LDC conference. On private sector, which is the Achilles heel in delivering the SDGs, UNDP offer is on 2 lines. First, and we discussed it, is what the private sector have been saying as help countries do de-risking so that you have a lesser risky environment for investment to come, but also provide what we call SDG intelligence, meaning information on SDGs. Private sectors don't know exactly how their bottom line can be influenced by SDG. This is an offer that UNDP can give to them. That's why we are supporting countries when they do their VNR, their voluntary national report, that they bring the private sector in the loop. Last but not least, the question of disability, which have been a little bit put on the back burner. After the July London conference last year on disabilities, in December this year, UNDP has issued guidance to all its country officers to ensure that whenever we have a country program document, whenever we have any program, we have to have a disability marker on it. Otherwise, it's something that we would reject as management. So this is a quite activist policy that UNDP is putting forward. If we say no one should be left behind, the LNOB principle, disability has to feature at the center of it. So that's my bird's eye view. Maybe I'll ask Africa Director to drill down further, and then Rosemary. Awuna?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for what I think are extremely useful reflections on the issue at hand. I would like to say this, that, you know, at the end of the day, ending poverty is a political decision and commitment. And fortunately for us and for the region of Africa, we actually do have this political commitment. We have it in the 2030 agenda globally for sustainable development goals. We have it at the regional level in the 2063 agenda of the African Union. We have increasingly all countries in this region, in the LDC region, having their own national development plans and frameworks and visions for achieving their development aspirations. Increasingly, we have local government structures and mechanisms that allow decisions to be made at the local level and at the community level to support development objectives. So I would say that in terms of framework, in terms of commitment, on paper, they exist. And one of the roles that UNDP is playing and will continue to enhance is how we get all those who have committed to actually follow the commitments with action at all those levels, global, regional, national, and local. We are finding that increasingly the poor, the most marginalized, the poorest, the most marginalized, and the most excluded dwell in two extreme zones, one in borderlands of Africa, the second in cities. And so for the Africa region, we have made a commitment as UNDP to launch a program on borderlands. These are areas where what we know as development practice, it's actually not applicable in some of these regions. And we continue to apply those models that we're familiar with. And so we want to invest quite seriously in developing new models that can have an impact in these very difficult areas. They're difficult areas to do development work, and yet these are areas that host a lot of our poor people. So an investment in borderland programming, new models for operating in these areas, good deep diagnostics and understanding the linkages within these border areas, the regional dimensions, the cross-border aspects of programming. Normally we program within countries. And so the challenge for us is to devise new ways of operating across borders, that our programs can be sensitive to this idea that poverty is no longer contained within borders, but the drivers of poverty sometimes lie between borders. And then on cities, this is really the new domain for growing poverty communities, if you like. If we don't pay attention to urbanization, to the growing flow of populations to cities that are not planned for those numbers of people, I think we might be seeing a relapse even for those countries that are making progress. And so how do we capture this before it becomes a mega crisis of poverty? We would like to invest. One of our new initiatives is to invest in a smart cities labs. The accelerators labs that my colleague Maya mentioned, one at a regional level, at least for Africa, would be on cities and how we enable countries to go in this direction of smart cities with the new technologies and digitized economies that exist, that we can do this. The third thing I want to say, it's about the need for most of these countries to do development with urgency. There is no luxury of time here. The population pressure is immense, and countries are basically trying to catch up in situations where the populations are totally impatient. And how do you enable governments to apply urgency to their development models and practices? And we have seen a demonstration of this in a program that we launched in a cost-sharing arrangement with certain countries, Senegal, Togo, and a few others in West Africa and Central Africa, which we call Emergency Program for Community Development. And we've seen quite impressive results from this kind of arrangement, these kinds of models of developing, but basically looking for shortcuts to get to people who are hurting because they don't have the right facilities, they don't have the feeder roads, they don't have the opportunities to attract private sector engagement. So that is one other experiment that we are trying to popularize and advance in many countries. And then lastly, to say something about the thought leadership approach. For many of these countries, they have to reclaim the policy space for development debate. for Development discourse. And the conference, third edition of the Emergence of Africa, which we talked about yesterday, International Conference for Emergence of Africa, which held in Dakar last week, is something that we wish to advance and continue to support as UNDP for countries in those regions themselves to own that space for discourse on what it is that makes emergence out of poverty possible. Thank you.
And now very briefly, I'll give the floor to the team leader for the 2030 agenda. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm aware of the time pressures, and I appreciate all of the comments that have come from the floor. In the interest of time, let me just give you a few examples, because many of you have asked for very specific examples, and I think that might be the best way of answering some of the broader questions as well. One of the key issues that's come up in the evaluation is about our linkage with the vertical funds. And yesterday you saw a very nice video, but I want to pick up this example of how the work in Nepal with the vertical funds on addressing climate change risks actually addresses the multidimensionality of poverty and also informs UNDP's positioning and the government of Nepal's positioning. So, for example, the project is working with the government and local communities to address climate change risks, which, as you know, is a key trigger of poverty and vulnerability. And this work is helping not only save lives, but protecting assets, preserving agricultural production, as well as the tourism industry. That is now being scaled up, not just from the one lake where this project was, but to all, I believe, 19 lakes, to another 19 lakes in Nepal. So that key thing of how do we better leverage the fantastic work we're doing with the vertical funds also shows how we are trying to address the linkages with climate change as well as with women's issues. I want to take now an example with UNCDF because that question came up many times. We have a new collaboration with UNCDF on areas of local development finance and financial inclusion, which allows deployment of in-depth expertise and innovative financing models in over 30 LDCs to look at the local level poverty challenges where the challenges are the greatest and the financial flows the weakest, and particularly on the Inclusive and Equitable Local Development Program, where we're working with UNCDF as well as UN Women. It's looking at the structural impediments that women face through local and public-private investments to unlock domestic capital, for women's empowerment. So for us, this challenge for addressing gender issues, for looking at the local level, can only come from the partnerships. I want to mention, in response to the question from Russia, the 27 missions, they were actually under an interagency umbrella. So we had actually up to 27 different UN entities, as well as 3 IFIs, participating in this. And it was UNDP's leadership from an integration perspective that actually helped mobilize these teams. You asked about the cost of that. It is really not very expensive because all we budgeted was travel and DSA. However, the contributions were from the staff time of different agencies. I just want to mention as a last point that in recognition of the contributions that UNDP has made to working with a lot of agencies, I personally have been selected to join the Development Coordination Office as the head of policy and programming. But this is not because of any great thing that I've done, but rather what UNDP has been able to do in leveraging the agencies, and I'm confident we'll be able to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am asked to give the floor very briefly to the Deputy Executive Secretary of UNCDF to answer a question that was answered by Australia and the US and Sweden. Thank you. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very quick. First of all, I would like to respond directly that we have an ongoing collaboration with UNDP that is, I would say, moving further, and we also capitalize on the fact that we have a new management team that has been embracing basically our mandate, and I'll go specifically in terms of what we're doing. We're collaborating today within the concept of the country platform, of course, the UNCIF, which you know is one of the main instruments that UNDP has in Asia, and of course the SDG impact team. Some of the elements, just to give you an idea of what we are doing together, what we're discussing. First of all, is anything related to the investment cycle, so anything related to the investment pipeline sourcing, its development, its de-risking, starting by the technical supports that we provide to basically to assess investment opportunities, to do the due diligence, of course, the credit scoring, and the deal structuring of those proposals. Of course, bearing in mind that these are investment opportunities that are SDG positive, that are promoting inclusive growth. Anything related to the deployments of loans or guarantees, we have a unique feature in our mandate, which is, of course, the utilization of those instruments, and we put also that at the disposal of UNDP. Anything related to innovation, which is the first topic. As you know, we have launched about 3 months ago an ETF at the New York Stock Exchange, and that's areas that we can explore together. First time there's a UN-affiliated instrument that is anchored in a stock exchange and not any stock exchange. Of course, we're talking also on the SDG bond that is being discussed for Haiti. And of course, discussion about how to connect investment capital, because it's easy to develop an instrument, but then you have to distribute it and find investors. And that equation is not that simple. So, of course, all the discussion to interact with the world, which is fairly new to us. As part of the discussion of the UNDP role of being an integrator of the UN community on the ground and playing also, let's say, a specific role with the RC, I think there is an opportunity, and that has been discussed, about how to, via UNDP, strengthen the role of the RC in terms of bringing the UN community on the ground to interact with the private sector, utilize financial instruments, connect with the capital. And I think these are new dimensions that are not very well understood, but there are a lot of declaration, and we can bring something to the table with UNDP. And the last point, and that was made by my colleague from UNDP, is the specific or technical expertise, besides the instruments and the connection to capital that we have in digital finance. We just sent, for example, our comments yesterday to UNDP's digital strategy on municipal finance, which is a theme that is becoming more and more important, and where it has generated interest not only from the UN community but many DFIs on fiscal decentralization, and of course in anything related to investing SME, youth, and so on. So let me conclude that we are engaging with the director of RBLAC and the other regional directors, and have been extremely positive with us. Also GF that we're discussing in greater length, and we see that the opportunity that is being offered with the senior management that is being today deployed on the ground by UNDP, 120 new leaders that are also seeking new ideas. So we put ourselves at their disposal to also to go into the specifics, and we would like to reiterate that message. So thank you again. I was given 1 minute. I took 2. I hope you'll understand. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now concluded consideration of the evaluation of UNDP support to the LDCs and the management note. And I wish to remind delegations that the official management response will be presented at the annual session 2019 in June. We will now continue with the report of the Independent Evaluation Office on its support to evaluation capacity development. And I give the floor to Mr. Indra Naidu again to present the report. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And just reflecting on the last session, to thank Ma and colleagues for the excellent input and collaboration we have had, and it most certainly helps in terms of the learning loop. Administrator Steiner mentioned positive disruption yesterday. I think we all know that evaluation causes a lot of disruption. We want it to be more positive, but we do so in order to promote both learning and accountability, because we make a judgment about past performance in order to inform a better future. And we are quite satisfied with this expanded discussion on the poverty evaluation, because it will be richer and more engaging. We would rather see a more thoroughly considered management response that is actionable than one that is done quickly and not actionable. So we very much appreciate this as part of the dialogue. Distinguished members of the board, once again, as you know, the main function of IEO is to conduct independent thematic and programmatic evaluations. But today I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to brief you on a special area of IEO's work, that is our contribution to capacity development for evaluation within UNDP and beyond. We do this in partnership with stakeholders and the global evaluation community, and we do this to support the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a highly relevant part of our evaluation work, as it supports the building of a global evaluation culture. While we have shared elements of this capacity development work through our annual report on evaluation, this is the first time that we are presenting the capacity development initiatives in a standalone comprehensive report. The first area of work of support for your consideration involves our efforts to improve overall quality and relevance of UNDP-led evaluations. In this regard, I'm very pleased to announce that the new UNDP evaluation guidelines, with the foreword by Administrator Achim Steiner, were launched yesterday and are now available on the UNDP IEO website. It's gone global. The new guidelines bring clarity to roles and responsibilities within UNDP for evaluation, provide more detailed guidance to bureaus and country offices for developing evaluation plans, and provide detailed templates to facilitate and strengthen decentralized evaluations. Other support to decentralized evaluation includes the work of the IEO to quality assess decentralized evaluations, information on which is included in each annual report on evaluation. The IEO also manages the Evaluation Resource Center, a publicly available, fully searchable repository of more than 4,000 evaluations. The second area of IEO support to evaluation capacity development focuses on the evaluation capacities and systems of UNDP's country partners. Those needs are potentially vast, and what our office can do is limited to select initiatives. A key component has been the organization of biennial national evaluation capacity conferences. The first NEC conference was organized in Morocco in 2009 in response to a request from the UNDP Executive Board. The positive feedback led to a second event in 2011 in South Africa, and the NEC conferences are now biennial events. The NEC conferences took on even greater salience with the adoption in September 2015 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 1 month later, the fourth NEC conference was held in Thailand. It focused on how governments can develop the necessary national evaluation capacities to meet the new challenges of the SDGs. The SDGs continued to be at the heart of the most recent conference in Istanbul, Turkey, in 2017. The conference in Turkey brought together government representatives, evaluation practitioners, and development professionals from a record 119 countries to examine national evaluation capacities with respect to people, planet, and progress in the SDG era. The conference sought to deepen the discussion, for example, on how evaluations can better help ensure that no one is left behind. Each of the conferences have been documented in comprehensive proceedings, all of which are available, and the most recent of which has been launched. The NEC 2017 conference proceedings includes 46 papers from 74 authors, most of whom are from UNDP program countries. The biennial conferences are recognized as a critical area for discussion of the political and institutional challenges in building evaluation systems that suit national needs. This differentiates the NEC conferences from seminars organized by evaluation academics or professional organizations. The NEC conferences provide a unique forum for the exchange of knowledge and practical lessons learned in institutionalizing evaluation and national evaluation systems. And the conference series will therefore continue, and we are currently planning for the next conference later this year in collaboration with our Regional Bureau for Arab States. Building on our experience with the conference series, the IEO has created 2 new tools. The first is an online self-assessment tool with an accompanying guidance document for evaluation diagnostics and strategizing. It consists of a series of questions that enable users to identify requirements for building capacities to evaluate national development strategies and progress towards the SDGs. It helps users identify how evaluation can best tie into national policies and institutional decision-making processes in their respective countries. It is designed for use by government entities regardless of their current accountability systems, processes, and capacities. The government of Senegal has piloted the tool, doing a self-assessment of its evaluation capacities and developing a strategy for evaluation at the national and sub-national level. A tool is also being piloted in Uganda and Nepal. A second tool, designed in response to feedback from NEC conference participants, is the National Evaluation Capacity Information Center, a user-friendly online repository which will provide easy access to information on the NEC conferences and other existing studies and materials on national evaluation systems by country. The third area of IEO capacity development interventions are at the level of the global evaluation community. Dramatic shifts in the approach to development over the past few decades and most notably the advent of 2030 Agenda, have given rise to new challenges to evaluation as an independent, critically reflective professional practice. I do add positive disruption. Despite the recognition of evaluation in the 2030 Agenda, analysis of voluntary national review reports submitted to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development show that country-level follow-up and review processes are focusing primarily on monitoring progress through quantitative targets. The role of evaluation still needs to be strengthened. There is thus a need to further energize and engage from, learn from, and influence the global evaluation community. To cite just one example of how the IEO is doing this, in April 2018, the office partnered with Wilton Park in the UK to convene a multidisciplinary high-level event designed to analyze the 2030 Agenda and new challenges to evaluation, and to contribute to the global debate on the purpose and use of evaluation for accountability and for learning. Looking forward in 2019, the Office will continue to strengthen its capacity development strategy, seeking greater synergies between the various capacity development initiatives as well as between these and its evaluative work. The IEO will continue to work with UNDP colleagues to further strengthen the culture of evaluation in the organization and to reinforce capacities and accountability for decentralized evaluation, including through in-person training on the new evaluation guidelines and an online training center. We will host the 6th NEC conference in 2019, giving even greater space on key platforms to national experiences, with a renewed emphasis on the importance of national evaluation systems for progress towards the SDGs. The next series continues to provide a unique global platform where UNDP and others can come together and with national partners to pursue strengthened evaluation systems as a tool for good governance and implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Through these global debates on the evaluation agenda and profession, the IEO contributes to the visibility of UNDP as a leading development organization and brings back lessons for future learning and growth. I'm joined at the podium by Chief of Section Heather Bryant and Ariel to take any questions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation.